After my son's death, he left me $19 million. My daughter-in-law wanted it all. Then one coffee changed everything. My daughter-in-law handed me a cup of coffee, her smile as fragile as porcelain. "I made this just for you," she whispered. But as the steam hit my face, a scent hiding beneath the dark roast caught me, the faint, sickly sweet whisper of bitter almonds. My son had warned me about that smell. He told me it was the scent of a perfect, untraceable murder. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The morning sun cut sharp lines across my marble kitchen island, the kind of perfect light that made the silence feel even heavier. It had been a week since we buried Andrew, and the quiet in this house was a physical weight. Vanessa, my son's widow, glided in, breaking the stillness. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but there were shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "Here, Mom," she said, her voice a little too bright. "A special latte, just for you. I use those expensive beans you like." She placed the ornate cup and saucer in front of me. I looked at her, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had loved. Her hands were trembling, just slightly. I took the cup. The porcelain was warm against my cold fingers. As I lifted it, pretending I was about to take a sip, the smell hit me fully. It was subtle, almost lost in the rich aroma of coffee, but it was there. Bitter almonds. My son's voice echoed in my mind, a memory so clear it felt like he was standing right beside me. We were watching a crime documentary months ago. "Mom, remember this," he'd said, a strange seriousness in his eyes. "Cyanide, in the right dose, is almost tasteless in coffee. It just leaves a hint of almond. Enough to do the job, but not enough for most people to notice." My heart seized. My blood ran cold, but my expression remained unchanged, a mask of weary grief I had perfected over the past week. I couldn't let her see. I couldn't let her know I knew. I forced a small cough, a dry, rasping sound. The cup jolted in my hand, and a dark splash of the liquid pooled on the pristine white saucer. It was a deliberate act disguised as a clumsy accident. Just then, as if on cue, Vanessa's mother, Patricia, walked in from the living room, fanning herself with a magazine. "Is that coffee? It smells wonderful in here." I looked from the spilled coffee to Patricia, then to Vanessa, whose face was tightening with panic. I offered a gentle, tired smile. "Oh, what a shame," I said, my voice steady, even kind. "Patricia, perhaps you could taste this little bit on the saucer. See if your daughter's skills are as good as she says. My old taste buds aren't what they used to be." Vanessa's face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She took a half step forward, her hands clenched, wanting to stop her mother but having no reason to. The silence in the kitchen was no longer just sad. It was deadly. And in the middle of it all, that small, dark puddle on the white saucer shimmered, holding a choice between life and death. 1 week earlier, I was sitting in a leather chair that felt as cold as a tombstone. The lawyer's office was all dark wood and hushed tones, a room designed to absorb grief. My own sorrow was a thick fog, numbing me to everything. I stared at a framed print on the wall, a ship sailing on a calm sea, and felt nothing. I was just a body in a chair. Mr. Davies, Andrew's lawyer, cleared his throat. The sound was like a stone dropping into a deep well. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Andrew Marston," he began, his voice a low monotone. I could feel Vanessa beside me. She even radiated the proper scent of mourning, a faint, expensive floral perfume. She'd placed a comforting hand on my arm when we walked in, a perfect portrait of the grieving daughter-in-law, Now she sat perfectly still, her head bowed. Mr. Davies droned on, listing assets and legal clauses that meant nothing to me. My son was gone. What did a stock portfolio matter? What did a property deed mean? They were just paper. Then, a number cut through the fog. And the entirety of my remaining estate, valued at approximately $19 million. The room went silent. Even the traffic outside seemed to hold its breath. I felt a small, sharp movement beside me. It was Vanessa. Her mask of sorrow had slipped for just a fraction of a second. I saw it from the corner of my eye, a flash of raw, ugly shock, followed by a flicker of pure rage. Her jaw tightened, and her manicured nails dug into the arm of her chair. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced once more by the placid face of a widow. But I had seen it, Mr. Davies continued, his voice unwavering. I bequeath to the most important person in my life, my beloved mother, Helen Marston. The words hit me, but the number was the real blow. $19 million. It was an impossible sum, a meaningless string of zeros. Andrew had been successful, I knew that. But this was something else entirely. This was a fortune. As the lawyer's words settled, a new sensation pricked the back of my neck, a cold, intense feeling of being watched. It was so strong, so focused, that it felt like a physical touch. I slowly turned my head, my gaze sweeping past the few business associates Andrew's office had sent. There, in the last row of chairs, sat a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin, the dark gray wool absorbing the light. He wasn't looking at the lawyer, he was looking directly at me. His face was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and a small, unreadable smile played on his lips. It wasn't a smile of sympathy. It was a smile of assessment, of ownership. It was the most chilling expression I had ever seen. Our eyes met for only a moment. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, as if we were in on a secret together. Mr. Davies finished. That concludes the reading. My condolences to you again, Mrs. Marston. People began to murmur and stand up. When I looked back to the last row, the man was gone. He had vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving only a cold spot in the air where he'd been sitting. Vanessa was beside me again, her voice thick with fake sympathy. Mom, are you okay? It's a lot to take in. But I wasn't listening. My grief, once a simple, crushing weight, was now tangled with something else. A thread of ice-cold fear. Vanessa's momentary rage, the impossible $19 million, and the predatory smile of a complete stranger. None of it made sense, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was all connected. Andrew's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was the beginning of something else. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the man in the tailored suit, his predatory smile slicing through the gloom of the lawyer's office. His name, I'd learned from a quick, hushed question to Mr. Davies' secretary, was Julian Croft, a business associate of Andrew's. The name meant nothing to me, but the man's face was a warning siren. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Just after 2 a.m, I gave up on rest. I found myself standing outside the door to Andrew's old office. It had been his bedroom as a boy, then his study when he'd come home from college. Now, it was a museum of a life cut short. I hadn't been inside since the funeral. It felt wrong, like trespassing on sacred ground. But Julian Croft's face pushed me forward. My gut told me that the answers I needed weren't in a lawyer's file, but in here. I switched on the desk lamp. A soft glow illuminated a thin layer of dust that had settled on everything, preserving the room exactly as he'd left it. His favorite books were still stacked on the corner of the desk. A half-empty mug sat on a coaster, and a framed photo of the three of us, me, Andrew, and his father, smiled out from the bookshelf. I wasn't here for keepsakes, though. I was hunting for a ghost. I started methodically. The desk drawers held old college papers and bank statements from years ago. The closet was filled with suits he no longer wore. Nothing felt out of place. Nothing seemed wrong. I was about to give up, to dismiss the feeling as the paranoia of a grieving mother, when I saw it. Tucked away under the desk, almost hidden in the shadows, was a sleek black leather briefcase. It didn't belong. Andrew used a worn messenger bag for his laptop, a canvas thing he'd had for years. This briefcase was expensive, impersonal, and secured with a 3-digit combination lock. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. I tried the combinations that felt obvious: his birthday, his year of birth. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Still nothing. My fingers trembled as I pictured the numbers, spinning them slowly. What would he have chosen? Finally, I tried the date I opened my fabric shop, the business I built from the ground up, the day I taught him what it meant to create something of your own. Click. The lock sprang open. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. It wasn't filled with business plans or contracts. It was filled with secrets. Folder after folder contained documents for shell corporations with nonsensical names, statements from offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, papers detailing wire transfers of huge sums of money, moving between companies like ghosts in a machine. It was the architecture of a life I knew nothing about, a life built on shadows and deception. And then I found the photograph. It was tucked inside the front flap, face down. I turned it over. It was Andrew, younger, beaming, with his arms slung around Julian Croft. They were on a boat, the sun glinting off the water behind them. They looked like best friends, like brothers, celebrating a victory. Julian's smile in the photo was different, genuinely happy. Not the cold, calculating expression I'd seen in the lawyer's office. They looked invincible. I sank into Andrew's desk chair, the cold leather a shock against my skin. The photograph felt like a stone in my hand, the perfect, loving son I had raised. The boy who was my whole world was a stranger. He was tangled up with a man who looked at me like a wolf looks at a lamb. The $19 million wasn't an inheritance, it was a motive. And my son's death wasn't an accident. It was the price of doing business. A few days later, the doorbell chimed, pulling me from the garden where I'd been trying to lose myself in the familiar work of pruning roses. I was expecting Vanessa. She'd been calling every day, her voice a cloying mix of concern and impatience. But when I opened the door, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, casting a long shadow on my welcome mat, was Julian Croft. He was even more imposing in person than he'd been in the lawyer's office. The California sun seemed to stop at the edges of his dark, expensive suit. "Mom," Vanessa said, stepping inside. Her smile was stretched thin. "I brought someone I want you to meet. This is Julian Croft. He was Andrew's best friend and his closest financial advisor." Julian stepped forward, extending a hand. His grip was firm and cool. "Mrs. Marston, it's an honor. Andrew spoke of you constantly. My deepest condolences for your loss." His voice was a smooth, deep baritone, the kind that could sell sand in the desert. I felt like a mouse cornered by two cats. I forced myself to play the part. "Oh," I said, my voice soft and frail. "Please, come in." We sat in the living room, the afternoon light streaming through the large windows. Vanessa fussed nervously, offering drinks, while Julian settled into the armchair opposite me completely at ease. He owned the space. Vanessa tells me you're feeling overwhelmed by the estate, he began, his expression a perfect mask of empathy. That's completely understandable. Andrew trusted me to handle the complexities of his portfolio, and I want to extend that same service to you. My only goal here is to protect his legacy. He slid a leather-bound folder onto the coffee table between us. He didn't push it toward me, just let it sit there. I've taken the liberty of drafting a preliminary plan. Nothing aggressive. We're not looking for high-risk, high-reward plays. This is about preservation, low-yield government bonds, blue-chip stocks, a diversified real estate trust. Slow, steady, and above all, safe. Every word was perfectly chosen, designed to soothe and reassure a grieving widow. He wasn't a shark promising unbelievable riches. He was a shepherd promising to protect the flock. It was brilliant, and it was utterly terrifying. I leaned forward, pretending to be a confused old woman. Oh my, that's all Greek to me, I'm afraid. My husband always handled the finances. Of course, Julian said smoothly. That's what I'm here for, to make it simple. Think of me as a guide, here to ensure Andrew's hard work keeps you secure for the rest of your life. Throughout his entire performance, he watched me. His eyes, a pale, cold blue, never left my face. They weren't warm or sympathetic. They were analytical, assessing my every flicker of emotion, every nod, every confused sigh. He was gauging how well the bait was being taken. Vanessa, meanwhile, watched him, her expression a mixture of adoration and fear. He had her completely wrapped around his little finger. I let out a long, weary breath and gave him a watery smile. You were a good friend to my son. Thank you, Mr. Croft. I'll have to think about it all. Please, call me Julian, he said, his own smile never quite reaching those cold eyes. When they finally left, I stood at the window and watched his gleaming black Porsche disappear down the street. The house felt contaminated. They hadn't come to offer help. They'd come to scout the territory. Julian wasn't a friend. He was a predator, and he thought he had found easy prey. He had no idea that this tired, grieving old woman had just started sharpening her own claws. After Julian's visit, my house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, and I was an actor playing a role I hadn't auditioned for. I couldn't trust the lawyer who had read Andrew's will, Mr. Davies. He was part of Andrew's new world, the world of $19 million and men like Julian Croft. I needed someone from the old world, my world. I needed someone who operated on a currency of trust, not shell corporations. That's how I found myself on the doorstep of a quiet, oak-lined street in a different part of town, ringing the bell of Arthur Vance's home. Arthur had been my husband's lawyer and, more importantly, his friend for over 40 years. He'd retired a few years back, handing his practice over to younger men with sharper suits. His office, now a study in his home, was the complete opposite of Mr. Davies's corporate suite. It smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and integrity. Helen, he said, his kind, wrinkled face breaking into a sad smile as he opened the door. Come in, my dear, come in. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole ugly story, my voice quiet in the stillness of his study. I told him about the will, the impossible sum of money, Vanessa's flash of fury, and the man in the tailored suit. I slid the photograph of Andrew and Julian across his polished mahogany desk. Arthur picked it up, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together. He stared at Julian's face for a long time. When he looked back up at me, the friendly warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a sharp, professional concern. He was no longer just a friend comforting a widow. He was a lawyer who smelled trouble. This man, Julian Croft, he said, his voice a low rumble. Andrew mentioned him once or twice, said he was a rainmaker, a guy who could make impossible deals happen. He put the photo down. Helen, I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. Something that's been bothering me for the better part of a year. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. About 10 months ago, Andrew came to see me. He didn't want to talk about contracts or investments. He wanted to know about moving money, specifically how to move a large sum of money internationally without leaving a paper trail. He was asking about bearer bonds, anonymous foundations, things that are technically legal but live in a very gray area. It was a conversation for a man who was either running a scam or running for his life. My blood ran cold. What did you tell him? I told him to be careful who he was swimming with, that sharks don't care who they bite. He just smiled and said he knew how to handle himself. Arthur sighed, a heavy, regretful sound. I didn't press him. I should have. I thought it was just a young man's bravado. He stood up and walked over to a large antique safe in the corner of the room. He spun the dial with a practiced hand and opened the heavy door. From a small drawer inside, he pulled out a single, simple object, a key to a safe deposit box. It was attached to a plain metal ring with no identifying marks. He came back a week after that conversation, Arthur said, placing the key on the desk between us. He gave me this. He said, Arthur, if anything ever happens to me, give this to my mother, and only my mother. Tell her I'm sorry. I stared at the key. It was so small, so ordinary, yet it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. For the first time since Andrew's death, I didn't feel completely alone. My son had known he was in danger, and he had left me a map. I picked up the key. The metal was cold and solid in my palm. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the last message from my son. It was a weapon. It was hope. The bank vault was colder than a winter morning. The air was still and smelled of metal and secrets. A polite young man with a practiced, somber expression had led me into a small, private viewing room and left me alone with the long, narrow box. My hands were steady as I inserted the key Arthur had given me. There was a solid, satisfying thunk as the lock turned. I slid the box out of the wall. It was surprisingly light. I lifted the lid, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was no cash, no jewelry, no stacks of bonds. Inside, there were only two things, nestled on a bed of black velvet: a single sealed envelope with my name written on it in Andrew's familiar scrawl, and a small, silver USB flash drive. My fingers trembled as I picked up the letter. I slid it open with my thumbnail and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I messed up. It means he got to me. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for the lies, and I'm sorry for the mess I'm about to leave in your lap. There's no easy way to say this. The $19 million. It's not clean money. Julian and I made it on a deal that was deep in the gray, maybe even over the line into the black. At first, it was a game. We were geniuses, smarter than everyone else, but I saw a side of Julian that scared me to death. He's not just ruthless, Mom. He's a monster. He enjoys the pain he causes. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. So I took the money, all of it. I locked him out and planned to disappear. I was going to come to you, to explain everything, but I needed to make sure I'd covered my tracks first. I guess I wasn't as smart as I thought. He'll come for the money. He thinks it's his. He'll be charming, he'll be helpful, but it's all an act. Don't trust him. And whatever you do, don't trust Vanessa. He'll use her to get to you. She's weak, and she loves the lifestyle the money gave her more than she ever loved me. He knows that. I left it all to you for a reason. You're the only person in the world I knew he couldn't break. You're smarter than him, stronger than him. You built a business from nothing with your own two hands. You can fight him. You have to. Everything you need is on the USB. All the proof, all the accounts, all the leverage. The password is your birthday, read backward. Day, month, year. I love you. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was. Andrew. The letter fell from my fingers. A single tear, then another, splashed onto the cold metal table. I wasn't crying for the son I had lost. I was crying for the son I never knew, the one who had been living a secret, terrifying life while smiling at me over Sunday dinner. I cried for his fear, for his loneliness, and for the innocence that had been stripped away from both of us. I sat there in the sterile silence of the vault, and I let myself feel it all. The crushing weight of the grief, the sharp sting of betrayal, the hollow ache of what could have been. Then, something shifted. The tears stopped. The sorrow in my chest began to cool, then harden, crystallizing into something new. It was anger. A cold, clear, diamond-hard rage. My son had been dragged into the dark, and he had fought to get out. He had lost. But he hadn't left me a burden. He had left me a battle plan. Julian Croft thought he was hunting a helpless old woman. He was wrong. I picked up the USB drive. It felt warm in my hand. Andrew's fight was over. Mine was just beginning. Back in Andrew's study, the room no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like an armory. I sat in his chair, the letter lying on the desk beside me, and plugged the silver USB drive into my laptop. A small window popped up, asking for a password. My birthday, backward. I typed in the 8 digits, my fingers moving with a strange new precision. The drive opened. It wasn't a jumble of files. It was a meticulously organized dossier. Andrew had prepared this for me. There were folders labeled transactions, offshore accounts, and correspondence. I clicked on the first one. My screen filled with spreadsheets detailing the flow of the $19 million from its shady origins into a single, consolidated account. Andrew had left a clean, damning trail that led directly back to Julian. The next folder, correspondence, was even worse. It contained a string of emails between Andrew and Julian. The early ones were triumphant, full of arrogant jargon about their disruptive market entry. But the tone soured. The last few emails from Julian were dripping with venom. One line burned itself into my memory. You think you can just walk away with my money? There is nowhere on this earth you can hide from me. But the real bombshell, the smoking gun, was in the last folder, labeled simply recordings. I put on my headphones and clicked the first file. It was an audio recording of a phone call. Andrew's voice, tight with stress, then Julian's, smooth as silk and just as deadly. It's over, Julian. I'm out, Andrew said. There is no out, Andy, Julian's voice replied, a chilling calm in his tone. We're in this together, all the way to the end. You know what's at stake. I can't do this anymore. People are getting hurt. A soft, cruel laugh echoed in my ears. They're not people, Andy. They're collateral damage. And you'd better remember that if you ever think about crossing me, because I will burn down everything you love, starting with that sweet old mother of yours. I ripped the headphones off, my breath catching in my throat. He had threatened me. He had used me as a weapon against my own son. The grief and anger inside me fused into a single point of cold, hard purpose. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the attack. My plan formed quickly, each piece clicking into place. Julian thought he was playing chess with a pawn. I was about to show him he was facing a queen. My first move was a trip to an online store that specialized in personal security devices. I scrolled past pepper sprays and stun guns until I found what I was looking for: a beautiful vintage-style silver brooch shaped like a rose. Tucked inside its delicate petals was a high-fidelity, voice-activated audio recorder. I paid for overnight shipping. The next afternoon, with the brooch pinned to my blouse, I picked up the phone. I took a deep, steadying breath, then summoned the character I had been forced to play: the frail, confused, grieving mother. My voice, when I spoke to Julian, was a masterpiece of trembling vulnerability. "Mr. Croft? Julian? It's Helen Marston," I whispered, as if the call was taking all my strength. "Helen, I'm so glad you called," he answered, his voice instantly shifting into its warm, concerned gear. "How are you holding up?" "Not well, I'm afraid. It's all just too much. The finances, the papers. I can't make heads or tails of it." I let my voice crack. "I've thought about what you said. I need your help. I want to accept your offer to manage the funds." "That's a very wise decision," he said, the satisfaction in his voice barely concealed. "But," I added quickly, "I don't feel comfortable discussing this over the phone, and I don't want Vanessa involved. This is between you and me. Could you come to the house tomorrow? I can give you the account information then, in person." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The predator, sensing the trap, was about to spring shut on its prey. "Of course, Helen," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Whatever makes you feel most comfortable. I'll be there." I hung up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. My face, reflected in the dark screen of the laptop, was cold and determined. The bait was set. The spider was inviting the fly into her parlor. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in deception. My home, once a place of comfort, became my stage. I was no longer Helen Marston, grieving mother. I was a character, and I played my part with the performance of a lifetime. I started by leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for Vanessa to find. On the corner of my kitchen island, where she was sure to see it, I left a brochure for international wealth management, a page on Swiss banking regulations conveniently dog-eared. Later, I sat at the desk in the living room, a stack of complex-looking wire transfer forms in front of me, sighing and rubbing my temples as if wrestling with a monumental task. Vanessa, who had arrived under the pretense of bringing me groceries, watched me from the corner of her eye. I could feel her anxiety radiating across the room. She wasn't excited. She didn't have the triumphant glint of a conspirator whose plan was coming together. She looked like a trapped animal. Her movements were jerky, and she kept wringing her hands when she thought I wasn't looking. The centerpiece of my performance came that afternoon. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number for a local weather recording. Holding the phone to my ear, I began my one-sided conversation in a voice loud enough to carry into the next room, where Vanessa was pretending to arrange flowers. "Yes, that's correct," I said, my voice firm but laced with the feigned stress of a novice. "The full amount. I want the transfer initiated as soon as the account is active. Yes, I have the routing numbers right here. It's a significant transaction, so I want to ensure there are no delays." I paused, listening to the automated voice drone on about a 70% chance of sunshine. "Understood," I continued. "Security is my primary concern. Once the funds are moved, they need to be completely secure. I appreciate your discretion." I hung up and let out a long, theatrical sigh. When I glanced into the living room, Vanessa was frozen, her face pale, a single rose dangling from her limp fingers. The look in her eyes wasn't greed. It was pure, unadulterated terror. That night, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was heading to bed when I heard a muffled sound coming from the guest room where Vanessa was staying. I crept closer, my feet silent on the thick hallway runner. The door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see her huddled on the edge of the bed, her back to me, the phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was a desperate, broken whisper, punctuated by sobs. I can't do it. I'm telling you, she choked out. She's moving the money. Tomorrow. It will be gone. There was a pause. I could imagine Julian's cold, merciless voice on the other end of the line. No, you don't understand, Vanessa pleaded, her voice rising in panic. She trusts me. How am I supposed to? He said if she doesn't hand over the money, he'll send someone to collect on my father's debt. He said he'd ruin him. Please, there has to be another way. I backed away from the door, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. All the burning hatred I'd felt for Vanessa, for the woman I thought was trying to poison me out of pure greed, evaporated. It was replaced by a hollow, aching pity. She wasn't a murderer in the making. She was a pawn, just like my son had been, caught in the gears of Julian's machine. Her father was in trouble, and Julian was using that debt to control her, turning her into a weapon against me. She was a victim, not a villain. But the show had to go on. The final act was tomorrow morning, and her role was already written. And so was mine. The morning sun cut the same sharp lines across my kitchen island. The air was just as still, the silence just as heavy. It was a perfect echo of that other morning, a scene replaying itself. But this time, I knew all the actors' lines before they were spoken. Vanessa entered, right on cue. She was holding a single ornate cup of coffee, the same one as before. But the woman holding it was different. The shadows under her eyes were darker. Her skin was pale and waxy, and her lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She looked like a ghost haunting my kitchen. Her eyes, when they met mine, were red-rimmed and pleading. They weren't the eyes of a killer. They were the eyes of the condemned. I made you your coffee, she stammered, her voice a dry rasp. She placed it on the counter in front of me. The faint, sickly sweet scent of bitter almonds rose with the steam. But this time, it didn't shock me. It was an expected note in a tragic symphony. I knew this was Julian's final, desperate command. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the terrified young woman trapped behind the facade. I saw the daughter whose love for her father was being twisted into a weapon. This time, I didn't feign a cough. I didn't jolt my hand to spill the dark liquid. I simply looked her straight in the eye, my gaze steady and clear, and let the mask of the frail old woman fall away completely. You know, Vanessa, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of everything I knew. Andrew liked coffee with a hint of almond, too. Her breath hitched. A flicker of sheer panic crossed her face. She knew that I knew. The game was over. But he always used to tell me, I continued, my tone gentle, almost conversational, that the greatest happiness is one that gets to be shared. With slow, deliberate movements, I reached for 2 small espresso cups from the cabinet. I picked up the poisoned latte, my hand as steady as a surgeon's. I poured half of the contents into 1 cup, and the other half into the second. The dark liquid divided perfectly between them. I slid one of the cups across the smooth marble island until it stopped directly in front of her. It sat there between us, a tiny vessel of judgment. My voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Why don't you have a cup with me, dear, to warm your soul? It wasn't a question. It was a choice. Confess or die. Vanessa stared at the cup as if it were a coiled snake. Her face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, her entire body trembling violently. The carefully constructed world she had been forced to live in was shattering around her, and all that was left was this single, impossible decision in a small cup of coffee. For a long, stretched-out moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the frantic beat of my own heart. Vanessa stared at the small cup, her face a canvas of horror. The choice I had given her, a choice between two kinds of death, had broken something inside her. Then came the crash. With a strangled cry, she swiped her arm across the counter. The tray, the original poisoned cup, and the two smaller cups I had poured went flying. They hit the tile floor with a deafening shatter of porcelain. Brown liquid splattered across the white floor like blood. The spell was broken. Vanessa crumpled to the ground amidst the shards, her body shaking with violent, racking sobs. She buried her face in her hands, her words a torrent of panicked confession. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she screamed, her voice raw with terror. "He made me do it. He said he'd ruin my father. He's out there. He's waiting in his car." As if her words were a summons, the back door burst open. Julian Croft strode in, a confident, victorious smile plastered on his face. He was expecting to find a scene of quiet tragedy. He was expecting to find me slumped over the counter, his problem neatly and silently solved. His smile froze. His eyes darted from me, standing perfectly calm and unharmed, to Vanessa, a sobbing heap on the floor among the wreckage of our coffee ceremony. He took in the shattered cups, the spilled liquid, the raw confession hanging in the air. The mask of the charming, sophisticated businessman disintegrated in an instant. Understanding, followed by pure, primal fury, flashed in his eyes. He had been played. He had walked straight into a trap. "You," he snarled, the single word dripping with a venom more potent than any poison. His civility vanished, replaced by the raw desperation of a cornered animal. He lunged, not at Vanessa, but at me. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides, his hands reaching for my throat, the last vestiges of his plan crumbling into brute force. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I stood my ground, perfectly still, as the monster revealed himself. As he closed in, I calmly raised a hand, not to defend myself, but to lightly touch the silver rose brooch pinned to my blouse. My voice, when I spoke, was not a plea or a cry. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold, hard finality of a closing vault door. "Thank you for the confirmation, Julian," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through his rage. "This entire conversation has been recorded. The police are waiting for you at the gate." His forward momentum stopped. He froze, his hands just inches from my neck. Disbelief warred with panic on his face. And then we both heard it, faintly at first, then growing rapidly louder. The unmistakable sound of approaching sirens wailed in the quiet morning air, a promise of justice racing down my tranquil suburban street. The police station was a world away from my sun-drenched kitchen. It was a place of beige walls, fluorescent lights that hummed with a tired buzz, and the lingering smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. The drama of the morning had been replaced by the slow, grinding mechanics of the justice system. It was loud and chaotic, yet I felt strangely calm, insulated from the noise by a thick blanket of exhaustion. Julian was gone, taken to a holding cell. The detectives had been almost giddy. Between Andrew's USB drive and the flawless recording from my silver rose brooch, which captured Julian's threats, his confession by omission, and his final violent lunge, they had what one of them called an open and shut, ironclad slam dunk case. Julian Croft's reign of terror was over. Vanessa had been taken to a separate room for questioning. She was not in handcuffs, but she wasn't free to go. She was a person of interest, an accomplice to attempted murder. Arthur arrived, his kind face a welcome sight in the sterile environment. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Helen, you did it. It's over." "Not quite," I said, my voice raspy. I reached into my purse and pulled out a second tiny digital recorder, one I had hidden in the guest room the night before. I had retrieved it after the police arrived. "There's something else you need to give them." We sat in a small private office. I pressed play, and Vanessa's desperate, sobbing phone call with Julian filled the room. We listened as she pleaded, as she spoke of the threats against her father, as Julian's unheard voice on the other end of the line clearly pushed her into a corner she couldn't escape. When it was over, Arthur looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You know what this does, Helen. This gives her a defense, coercion, duress. It might not get her off scot-free, but it will certainly lighten her sentence. After what she tried to do to you." "She was a pawn, Arthur," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Just like Andrew was. Julian broke them both. He finds people's weaknesses and uses them as levers to move his world. For Andrew, it was ambition. For Vanessa, it was fear for her family." I pushed the recorder across the table to him. "I'm not doing this to forgive her. I don't know if I can. I'm doing this because it's the truth. Julian didn't just try to kill me. He tried to turn her into a killer. She deserves to pay for her choices, but she also deserves to have the whole story told." Later, a detective led me to a room with a one-way mirror. On the other side, in a small, bare interrogation room, sat Vanessa. She was no longer crying. She was just sitting there, staring at her hands, looking small and broken and utterly alone. A cup of water sat untouched on the table in front of her. I watched her, this woman who was my daughter-in-law, the woman who had brought poison into my home. I expected to feel a surge of anger, or perhaps the cold satisfaction of victory. I felt neither. All I felt was a profound, bottomless sadness. Julian was the monster, but his evil had spread like a disease, infecting everyone he touched. He had pitted us against each other, two women who should have been family, and turned us into adversaries in his sick game. He was going to prison, but the wreckage he left behind, a dead son, a shattered daughter-in-law, a broken family, was ours to live with. I had won the war, but the cost felt devastatingly high. 6 months can feel like a lifetime. The seasons had turned, and the frantic, adrenaline-fueled terror of that morning in my kitchen had faded into a quiet, settled scar. The legal battles were over. Julian Croft, faced with irrefutable evidence, had been sentenced to a long, quiet life in a maximum security prison. My testimony, along with the recording of her desperate phone call, had earned Vanessa a lighter sentence for her role. Not freedom, but a chance at it someday. The government, as expected, had seized the $19 million. It was blood money, and I wanted nothing to do with it. But Andrew, in his complicated double life, had also maintained a portfolio of legitimate, clean investments, the fruits of his earlier honest career. It was a modest sum in comparison, but it was enough. I didn't use it to travel the world or retreat into a quiet retirement. I used it to build. In a bright, sunny office downtown, with large windows overlooking the city, a small gold plaque was installed next to the door. It read, "The Andrew Marston Legacy Foundation." Our mission was simple: to provide free legal aid and financial counseling to victims of sophisticated financial fraud, the kind of people Julian Croft preyed on. We helped people who had been chewed up and spit out by the sharks of the world. It was my way of cleaning up the mess, of turning the tainted legacy of my son's final years into something that could heal. Today, however, my work was more personal. I found myself in another sterile, quiet room, But this one was different. It was a prison visiting area. When Vanessa walked in and sat down behind the plexiglass partition, she looked like a different person. The haunted, terrified look was gone. The prison uniform hung loosely on her, but she carried herself with a new stillness. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber acceptance. She had been through the fire and come out the other side, changed. "Helen," she said, her voice clear, without the tremble I remembered. "Thank you for coming." "How are you, Vanessa?" I asked. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the panicked tears of before. They were slow, sad tears of genuine remorse. "I'm okay," she said, a small, watery smile touching her lips. "I'm finally getting the help I need. I see now. I see everything so clearly. What I did. What I almost did. There are no excuses." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. There was no anger left in me, just a deep, quiet ache for all that had been lost. I slid a book through the slot at the bottom of the partition. It was a simple novel, one I thought she might like. She looked down at it, then back up at me, her expression full of a question she didn't know how to ask. "Andrew left a mess for both of us," I said softly, answering the unspoken question. "It's time we started cleaning it up." She nodded, clutching the book to her chest as a fresh wave of tears fell. This time, I knew they were for my son. I left the prison and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. I tilted my head back and looked up at the vast, cloudless blue sky. A sense of peace, one I hadn't felt since before Andrew's death, settled over me. I hadn't saved my son's life, but I had saved his name. I had fought the monster who destroyed him and found a way to build something new and good from the ashes. The $19 million was gone, but I had found the true inheritance. It wasn't money, it was purpose. And for the first time in a very long time, it was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.